In the small town of Vista Verde in the heart of the 1980s, everyone knew Aurora Blake, the daughter of the local pharmacist Walter and the piano teacher Vivian. She was like a ray of sunshine in that decade of excesses, genuine, brilliant, and impossible to ignore. While the world outside talked about discos and festivals, Aurora preferred the silence of the books in the municipal library where she had worked since she was 18. But what no one understood was why she, so admired, only had eyes for Caleb Reed, the quietest man, and, according to many, the ugliest in town. At 25, Aurora was the kind of woman who drew sighs as she passed by, not just for her evident beauty, the brown hair that fell in soft waves down to her waist, the honey-cold eyes that seemed to hold sweet secrets, the smile that lit up any room. But for something more, a sort of inner light that overflowed in every gesture. "My daughter was born with a gift," Vivian would say to the neighbors as she watched her help an elderly lady carry her groceries or patiently teach the neighborhood children how to ride a bicycle. "She sees what others don't." Aurora had two sisters. Elise, the eldest, serious and practical, who managed the fabric store in the city center, and Tessa, the youngest, spirited and restless, who was still studying to become a veterinarian. The three were as different as the seasons of the year, but shared the same determined look as their mother. In the Blake family's mailbox, there was no shortage of letters, flowers, and invitations for Aurora. The young men from the city and even from neighboring towns competed for her attention. "You could have anyone," Elise would say while organizing the received letters in a decorated box. "Why not give Paul a chance? His family has wealth, a guaranteed future." Or would just smile, enigmatic. "It's not about having just anyone. It's about finding someone special for me." Tessa rolled her eyes, amused. Always the romantic one in the family. What the sisters didn't know was that every morning when Aurora walked to the municipal library where she worked, her eyes always drifted to the same window, the moss-green corner house where the Reed family lived. It was a modest, well-maintained house with a small garden lovingly tended by Rosemary Reed, a widow for 5 years. And there, usually engrossed in a book or helping his mother with the garden, was Caleb. Caleb Reed was not the kind of young man who drew attention on the streets of Vista Verde. At 28 years old, he worked as an accountant at the town's only bank. He always arrived at the same time, carrying a worn leather briefcase, dressed in discreet shirts, usually in shades of blue or gray. He spoke little, smiled even less, and when he did, it was a reserved smile. What stood out most about his appearance, however, was the scar that ran from his left temple nearly to the base of his neck, a jagged reddish line that gave the impression his face had been broken and then precariously stitched back together. Younger children were sometimes frightened, while adults politely tried not to look directly. Caleb had two younger brothers, Leo and Max, still children, whom he helped raise since their father's death. On Sundays, it was possible to see him in the square, reading stories to his brothers or patiently teaching them the lessons they found most difficult in school. It was on one of these Sunday mornings that Aurora, passing through the square, dropped a few books she was carrying. In seconds, Caleb was there quietly picking them up. "Thank you," she said, receiving the books from his hands. "Caleb, right? We're neighbors." He nodded, slightly surprised that she knew his name. "Yes, it's a pleasure, Aurora." His brothers watched the scene with curiosity. It wasn't common to see people, especially someone like Aurora, talking to Caleb of their own free will. "Are they your brothers?" Aurora asked, smiling at the boys. "Leo and Max, right? You attend my reading workshops at the library." The boys confirmed, both embarrassed and proud to be recognized. "Does Caleb read to you?" Aurora continued, her eyes shining with genuine interest. "He reads better than anyone," exclaimed Max, the youngest. "He uses different voices for each character." Caleb blushed uncomfortable with the praise. "Maybe one day you could read to the children at the library," Aurora suggested with a naturalness that made Caleb's heart race. "We are always in need of volunteers." He hesitated, instinctively, running his fingers over the scar. "I'm not sure if the children might get scared." Aurora tilted her head slightly, observing him with those eyes that seemed to see beyond. "I think you might be surprised by what children really see," she said softly. A week later, Caleb showed up at the library. He stood at the door for a few minutes, hesitant, the worn leather folder clutched in his arms like a shield. Aurora saw him and walked over as if she had been waiting for his arrival her entire life. "You came," she said, and her smile did not hide how happy she was about it. So it began. An invitation for coffee after the children's reading. A walk through the square. A conversation about books that extended until dusk. A visit to the small town cinema to watch an old black and white movie. The news spread like wildfire. The beautiful Aurora Blake courted by so many having dates with Caleb Reed, the reserved accountant with the frightening scar. Speculations did not take long to arise. Some said she was just being kind, fulfilling some kind of Christian charity. Others suspected it was a strategy to make one of her admirers jealous. The more malicious suggested there must be something wrong with her for choosing such an unlikely man. Elise confronted her sister one night while Aurora was combing her hair in front of the mirror. "What are you doing, Aurora?" she asked, exasperated. "The whole town is talking. People are starting to think that you've lost your mind." Aurora continued combing her hair calmly. "And what do you think? I think you are throwing your life away. Caleb is well, he's decent. I'm not saying he's not, but he's not for you. Look at him. Look at you." Air set the brush down on the vanity and turned to her sister. "I look at him every day, and you know what I see? I see a man who takes care of his mother and siblings without complaining. I see someone who treats everyone with respect and kindness. I see a man who understands the value of silence, who appreciates the beauty in small things. But he is ugly, Aurora," Elise said, uncomfortable with her own words. "That scar. Beauty fades," Aurora replied with a serenity that seemed to come from centuries of wisdom. "Character does not." The months passed. Summer turned to autumn, autumn to winter, winter to spring again, and Aurora and Caleb carried on. The comments began to diminish, replaced by a kind of resigned acceptance. It was on a spring night while walking through a garden that Caleb stopped, held Aurora's hands in his, and with a trembling voice asked, "Will you marry me?" There was no ring. There was no elaborate speech, just the simple question and the tremor on his lips, as if he were offering his bare heart, unprotected. Aurora did not hesitate. "Yes," she replied, and a single tear ran down her face. "Yes, Caleb. I want to marry you." The news of the engagement dropped like a bombshell. If there had been speculation before, now there was open astonishment. Aurora's childhood friends called her for a chat, worried she was making the biggest mistake of her life. Her father, Walter, asked several times if she was sure, while Vivian watched everything with attentive but silent eyes. "You are young, beautiful, you have so many possibilities," one of the aunts argued during a family gathering where the tension was palpable. "And I chose the best of them," Aurora replied firmly as she intertwined her fingers with Caleb's, who remained silent, but with his chin held high. The wedding was scheduled for June, when the flowers would be at their peak in the Blakes' garden. It would be a simple outdoor ceremony among the flowers that Aurora loved so much. The wedding day dawned perfectly. The sky was an impossible blue with not a single cloud to mar its purity. The hydrangeas, as promised, displayed their clusters of flowers in shades of blue and lilac, perfuming the air with their gentle fragrance. The guests arrived gradually. Rosemary, Caleb's mother, sat in the front row, her eyes filled with tears, with her younger children beside her, dressed in their finest attire. When the music began, all heads turned. Aurora appeared arm in arm with her father in a simple white silk dress without extravagant embroidery or an exuberant veil. Her beauty lay in her simplicity, in the light that seemed to emanate from her. Caleb awaited her at the small makeshift altar, dressed in a navy blue suit that Aurora had chosen to match his eyes. Aurora's sisters, sitting side by side, had different expressions. Elise still seemed resigned, while Tessa was smiling, finally understanding what her sister saw in Caleb. The ceremony was brief and emotional. Aurora and Caleb exchanged vows they had written themselves, simple words about love, respect, and the commitment to see beyond appearances. When the officiant declared them husband and wife, the kiss they shared was chaste, but deeply intimate. It was after the polite applause, as the guests were already getting up for the reception, that Walter, Aurora's father, asked to speak. His deep voice, accustomed to advising customers at the pharmacy, echoed through the garden. "Before we begin the celebration, I would like to say a few words," he announced, holding a glass. "I know many here have questioned my daughter's choice. They seem like opposites, but there is something much greater that binds them." Caleb lowered his head while Aurora squeezed his hand more tightly. "But today," Walter continued, "I feel it's time to break a silence that has lasted far too many years." The entire garden fell into absolute silence, and he made a revelation that no one expected. "When Aurora was 9 years old, she fell into an abandoned well at the back of my parents' property, which was close to home. The well was hidden by tall grass, and no one noticed when she wandered off to play." Walter's voice faltered for a moment. "Those were the most terrible hours of my life. We were all searching, desperate, calling her name." Aurora looked at her father, surprised by the revelation. Caleb kept his eyes down. "And it was Caleb, still a boy," Walter continued, "who found her. He was playing alone on the neighboring property and heard a faint cry. When he realized what it was, he didn't hesitate. He jumped into the well without thinking, even though he couldn't swim. He pulled my daughter out with his arms scratched and his forehead bleeding. The scar that many here point out and comment on was the price he paid for saving her life." A murmur of astonishment went through the guests. Several lowered their eyes, embarrassed. Others looked at Caleb with newfound understanding. Everyone was left speechless. "And do you know what he did afterward?" Walter asked with his voice choked up. "Nothing. He didn't tell anyone. He didn't want recognition. He continued his life with the same humility and generosity as always. They have much more in common than you imagine, the kindness, the purity that they both have within themselves." Walter then turned directly to Caleb, who finally raised his eyes. "Today, my son-in-law, I not only give my daughter to you, I thank you for that day, for all the days you loved her silently, for everything you are." Caleb couldn't hold back his tears. Aurora embraced him, also crying while whispering something in his ear that no one else could hear. Vivian approached, hugging the two of them. Elise and Tessa followed, and soon a line formed. People who wanted to greet not only the couple but especially Caleb, now seen in a new light. The music started again, more cheerful. The party continued, but something had changed. The looks toward the couple were no longer of pity or scorn, but of respect and, in some cases, admiration. At the end of the night, while they danced under the soft lights hanging between the trees, Aurora rested her head on Caleb's shoulder. "Why did you never tell me?" she asked softly. Caleb kissed her hair before answering. "Because I didn't save you to be remembered or to receive something in return. I did what anyone would do. Not everyone would, Caleb. And that's why I love you." Years went by. Aurora and Caleb built a life together. Had children who grew up hearing the story of the well not as a heroic tale but as a lesson about seeing beyond appearances. Caleb's scar, which was once a subject of whispers, became a symbol in the small town, a reminder that a person's true worth is not what the eyes can see, but what the heart can discover. And when someone new came to town and looked strangely at that seemingly unequal couple, she radiant in her mature beauty, he with his marked face, they soon learned the lesson that this community never forgot. Prejudice blinds, but truth illuminates, and true love sees far beyond the surface.